Hello and welcome. My name is Victoria Lassorde, and I am the Chief of Staff at Barnard's Athena Center for Leadership. On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it's my honor to welcome you to the 12th Annual Athena Film Festival. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring these stories to life. So thank you so much for joining us. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. So please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. To all of our other sponsors, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. Tickets are still available for remaining in-person events this weekend and for the virtual program that will be available March 11th through 20th. So please be sure to check out our website, athenafilmfestival.com. Now it's my pleasure to introduce this panel, Pushing Boundaries in a World Full of Limits, a conversation about the challenges of creating entertainment today. Thank you to our partners, Barnard Women in Entertainment, for their partnership in putting this panel together. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Deanna Barnert. Deanna is an accomplished entertainment journalist and communications consultant. So with that, Deanna, over to you.
Hello. As mentioned, this event is brought to you in part by Barnard Women Entertainment, of which I'm a founding West Coast board member. After 10 years of existence, this alumni organization has successfully established West Coast and East Coast branches, and in this age of Zoom meetings, we've united internationally, which has been pretty incredible. We're once again partnering with the Athena Festival to host a conversation about creating fresh and thought-provoking content, which is especially challenging in a world that can sometimes feel like it's on fire. I'm Deanna Barnert, class of 95, and I'm an entertainment journalist published in Emmy Magazine, SheKnows.com, MSN.com, and for you soap fans, Soaps in Depth. I've been covering TV for over 20 years, so I'm incredibly excited about this lineup of women who are in the thick of it. We have director, photographer, and musician Sadé Clacken Joseph, Barnard class of 2011, the founder of Out of Many Media, and an awardee of the inaugural 30 Under 30 Caribbean American Emerging Leader and Changemaker Award, for which she was honored at Obama's White House. She's currently set to direct Issa Rae's Rap Shit. Julie O is a producer and founder of OCO, a film and television production company currently in a first look deal with Chernin Entertainment. She most recently produced a little project you may have heard of called Tick Tick Boom. She's also served as executive producer on Hillbilly Elegy and The Spy Who Dumped Me. We could go on. And then we have Lara Azzopardi, a multi-nominated writer, producer, director whose roster includes The Bold Type, Mary Kills People, and Backstage. With her first writing credits on Degrassi, The Next Generation, she's now come full circle as the co-showrunner for HBO Max's upcoming Degrassi reboot, which is set to start shooting this summer. And let's do this. So as a bit of an introduction, why don't you each tell us what a recent day of work looked like for you? And if you're in a holding pattern, you can reference back to a recent experience that left an impression. Lara, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, I hope we're not premiering in the summer. My God. We are starting the writer's room for Degrassi on Monday. So I have been in the thick of finding writers and, building that room, interviewing, and just getting ready for the big day on Monday where we all meet and start to break story. So that's what I've been doing for the last month or so.
Excellent. And Julie?
So I haven't had an office since 2018. I feel like I was totally ahead of the curve before the pandemic. But in the way that everyone keeps talking about going back to work, I'm like, I don't know what that looks like. I've kind of just been doing the same thing for the last however many years, which is you wake up every morning and I try to create the scaffolding around my day so I can actually focus on what I'm doing. Because as a producer, you have so many different tasks in front of you. And so I usually try to reserve my mornings for more creative, watching cuts, giving notes, reading new drafts of scripts, and then the afternoon more for the outside facing things, the calls with agents, the meetings that you have to do. And so The nice thing about working from home is I can run out of this room in between all of those and go hug my cat. And I think that is probably the one constant in every workday that I have.
Excellent. And Sadé?
Sorry, I don't know if you noticed, but I dropped out for a second there. Do you mind repeating the question? Because I missed it.
Oh, yes. Well, what does a typical day of work look like for you right now? And if you have secrets, you can say it in a way that doesn't divulge anything.
So my days vary depending on where I'm at and what project I'm at. So currently right now, I just finished directing another episode of television for a show called Good Trouble. So that just wrapped. So things are a little calmer. A typical work day for me right now is working on revisions for my feature draft, as well as another feature, working with another writer that I'm developing another feature with. So it's just getting up, making sure I get my exercise, my rest, and then writing and taking a meeting here and there. So that's the current situation, not in production.
So each of you has a very high profile project that's either recently debuted or been announced. In a few sentences, tell us what brought you to the project. Was it a passion project? Was it something you'd wanting to do? Sadé, why don't you continue how did you get involved in Rap Shit? And by the way, were you in that pitch meeting? That must have been amazing.
Yeah, so I got involved with Rap Shit. I actually directed a commercial starring Issa for Madewell about a year ago, last January 2021, and that's when I first collaborated with Issa and her team. And after that project, we developed a rapport, and they asked me if I would pitch for the TV show, and so that's how I was able to get that opportunity.
Very cool. And Lara, you actually have a connection to yours, so I feel like there might be a.
I do. So I was part of a writing team when I first started my career with Julia Cohen, and then we kind of went off on our own and had our own careers. And our first paid writing job back in Toronto was a freelance episode of Degrassi. And when we heard they were rebooting Degrassi, we threw our names in the hat, and somehow they picked us. It feels very full circle, and it's just a show. While I've done a lot of, procedurals and, lots of different kinds of shows, this kind of is my dream job. It's a serialized 1 hour, just about exploring identity, whether you're a kid or a teacher or a parent and all of it. So I'm still pinching myself that this is actually happening.
That's amazing. And Julie, how did you come across Tick, Tick, Boom?
I am also pinching myself that the movie exists and is out in the universe. My journey with the musical really began in 2014 when I went and I saw a performance of it at New York City Center's Encore series. And it was, 5 performances. I was lucky to get a ticket. I had a really shitty ticket in the mezzanine. And I watched this, and I had never seen the musical before. I had known Jonathan Larson's musical Rent because it's gone all around the world, but this was something that was a complete surprise to me. And Lin-Manuel Miranda was playing the main role, and Leslie Odom Jr. was also in it. And I tried to find out about the film rights at that point. Even though I was a junior studio executive, I was like very, very low on the totem pole. And what I learned is that the family, Jonathan Larson's family, was very protective about the rights, because we all know that the development process can go so many different ways. And their question for me was really, well, what is your plan and what would you do with it? And I really went back and forth for the next 2 years trying to answer that question until I realized it was in front of me the entire time. It was Lin-Manuel Miranda would be the only person that could direct the movie, and I had no idea if he agreed with me. But I got the family's blessing to approach him, and I sent him an email asking if he would ever be interested now that I had the family and the rights. And he wrote back in like 2 hours.
Amazing.
And we went off to the races to start figuring out how we would even start developing a script. And here we are.
Amazing, amazing. So between the pandemic, climate change, cancel culture, political turmoil, we've never needed compelling, thought-provoking entertainment more than we do. But as a creator, what have you recently found to be the biggest challenge, and what ways have you found to work around it? Anybody have a thought that jumps to mind?
I do. For me, I'll start with saying that I am a huge TV fan. I mean, I love television. I love movies. I am a fan of all things theater, all of it. And what I'm craving as an audience member is it's fine to see really, sorry, apologize. It's, I'm fine watching dark stories and, really, not the most uplifting things, but what I'm craving in that is hope. And so as someone who is, venturing to take on Degrassi, I'm conscious of, in this world we live in, where's the hope? I've got 3 kids. That's kind of who bring me out of the darkness a lot of the times, because I can't get too into my own self because I've got to take care of 3 people. And so they remind me constantly of the hope and where the light is in this world, and how do I convey that in the stories that I'm telling, even if I'm not feeling so great and so hopeful at the time, as I sit down and start typing. So,
Along those lines, Sadé, you're actually, like you mentioned, you're working on 2 writing projects, so you're creating stories. So for you, what do you feel is the biggest challenge when you sit down and try and get there?
Well, for me, honestly, there's lots of challenges, especially as a woman of color in this industry, and staying confident in your own self and your vision, not letting imposter syndrome set in. A lot of it is like internal battles you have to overcome every day just to keep yourself going. And because, for at least for me, I'd never really had that grounding and confidence, like, and freedom to create as an artist growing up. Like, I'm a first generation American. I come from an immigrant family, a very, very hardworking immigrant family. And becoming an artist was never really in the cards for me. And so
Right.
until now. And so learning how to embrace that fully, learning to speak up and speak out, and do that with conviction when times are hard, when maybe you're writing something that hasn't really been done or seen before. And doing that with confidence, conviction, and knowing that, like, every day, and like reminding yourself, I'm meant to be here, I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. I think those are kind of like things that you have to keep reminding yourself, as like a
So when
creator, or even a woman in this industry.
I have
day
to ask,
day,
when
I think.
you step into your director hat, does that require even more of that? Or do you just, once the hat goes on, you're there? Because you have to be there, right?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, once the hat's on, it's on. Um, absolutely. But I think dealing, creating, and when times were difficult, especially like at the height of the pandemic with George Floyd and all the things that were going on, and feeling hopeless, turning to art it's therapy, and
Mhm.
it gives you validation, knowing that, like, oh, people need hope, as Lara was saying. People need to remember that they're human and that we're, people need to see each other more wholly and fully. And like, that's what inspires me in my art, because my work centers around like representation and human connection and showing the beauty in different cultures and people coming together. So it like fuels me in dark times, like reminding like, oh, our work is still needed and still valid, and our voices actually matter and are needed. So sorry, I don't know if that answers the question, but I just felt like saying that because I feel like we're all doing that.
Right, it's interesting because it's challenging, but we've never needed it more. But
yeah,
it's also a
we've
relief.
never needed our stories more.
So for Julie, I know you had a lot of logistical issues because I think you started taping Tick Tick, then you had to stop, and then you came back during the pandemic. So did that create a whole shift in what you were making? Like, did you have to completely reframe, or did you find a way to make, like, how did that work?
Well, we got a whole 8 days into our shooting schedule because our first day of production was March 3rd, 2020. Which, as we were leading up to it, it sounded like a really auspicious date. I was so excited about it. But I want to touch just upon imposter syndrome because it is so real. And I think that it is something that just follows you around no matter what you've done and where you are. And I distinctly remember the day that we got shut down was March 12th. And that was a really scary day because in the beginning, you started to hear rumors. I started getting text messages that Broadway was shutting down. And I thought that is never going to happen because that has never happened before. And we were shooting at Jonathan Larson's real apartment in the West Village. And I took a walk around the block and I just kept thinking, I don't know that I'm equipped for this. And I said, who can I call that's a more experienced producer that I can ask them and they can walk me through what they did in the last pandemic? And then it sort of hit me that the last pandemic was 100 years ago, and no one has ever faced this challenge and these decisions before. And that was really clarifying for me because from that point onwards, I just thought, I know exactly what questions to ask. We should not be filming right now. There are so many more important things. And so how do I work with the studio and work with Netflix so that we can figure out a way to go down and get everyone home where they need to be? And we went on an initial 2-week hiatus, and we were told, be ready to go back into production in April, which sounds very naive in hindsight. But we were ultimately down for 6 months. And that was a period where it wasn't like other people were going off and taking other jobs. We were just all kind of steeping in the creative because we never really had a chance to wind down from it because it was so unexpected. And I think it actually made the movie better because we would check in every 2 weeks. We would do what we would call Tick Tick Zooms. We'd bring in our sound mixer, our PAs. And by the time we got back on set, even though we were covered in layers of PPE, it's like I knew everything about everyone's family, where they had been, the names of the animals on their farms. And it just was a really positive, joyous experience, even though the circumstances were really difficult.
Yeah. And I want to touch on the emotional, which Sadé really did already, but in addition to the logistical element, if you go back to George Floyd, you look at what's happening in the Ukraine, this isn't a simple question, but I'm looking for a sort of simple answer. How do you create under these emotionally devastating circumstances? Do they fuel you? Do they hold you back? Do you compartmentalize? I feel like Sadé already said it fuels her a bit, but if you have more to say, feel free. But I'm curious how you each handle that, because it's a devastating time sometimes.
I was like, I'll jump in. I personally just feel really galvanized by it because I think we're already very lucky to do what we do, and to do it under these circumstances. It just reminds you that every TV show, every movie is its own miracle. But then people need it more than ever. And there's a reason why storytelling has been a part of our society from the very, very earliest days of man. It's because we need to share parts of ourselves. And for me as a producer, I've never felt more galvanized to try to just make it happen. And so I learned a lot about COVID and a lot about air scrubbers, but that was what was necessary so that we could actually get back on set.
Right.
I would say, I mean, I had some dark moments where I couldn't get to the computer. You know, I as much as, you know, I worked pretty much through the whole pandemic, but working, my husband working from home, the 3 kids being home, trying to be creative with deadlines, as much as it was important and as much as, you know, I was lucky to be working during that time. There were some dark moments. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, you know, where I would just have to lock myself in the bathroom and just have some time to think. Because I found even though there was so much time, I wasn't maybe it was that I was thinking too much and so much about everything, I couldn't focus. And so just finding that time to focus was there, you know, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we were doing the bold type. We got shut down and then came back and we're writing. It was a I've become a master juggler is the way I describe my time. But a very privileged one in that too.
Right.
Yeah, radical self-care, honestly. Like Julie, yes, I get very galvanized in times like these, and like work, a lot of us working so much over the pandemic, and then, you know, would burn out, or like, yeah, you know, things set in and you realize, you know, where things are in the world. And it's like in those moments, leaning into self-care is so important for us as filmmakers.
Yeah.
And having those bouts of just rest and like kind of detaching and not getting overwhelmed by what's going on in the world. Because I think us as filmmakers are like, yeah, we're so eager to like heal the world with our art and like, you know, put our work first and then ourselves second. And you got to just remember, you got to put yourself first, because once you're taking care of yourself, then it goes back into the work. So moments of self-care and rest, and
Amen.
when it allows.
So this is a whole new kind of pressure we're going to discuss. And we're going to start with Lara, because you're in this age of reboots. I would love to hear about the challenge and joy of taking a beloved franchise and reimagining it for a new audience, especially when audiences can go either way with the reboot. Like they could go completely in awe love, or they could really be difficult. So how do you approach that?
It's a really, I mean, I feel like it's going to be both. It is, there's no way that in this kind of reboot with the global, you know, touch that a show like Degrassi has, I'm going to be able to please everyone. And so I approach it terrified is the honest answer. I am terrified, but also I'm just so, I mean, again, I approach it as a fan, like as a genuine fan of the show. And all I can do is, you know, try to make a show that I, as a fan that knows the show, but also I'm going to experience it for a new audience, what's great, you know, what I want. And having said that, also, you know, we're about to start a room. The writers in the room are going to bring, I'm so excited to get their voices, because you know, I look at myself as a showrunner more as a curator than anything else. And these voices are, and these young people that we've put together are just so, they've had such a diverse life experience that I'm just approaching this, you know, in the age of reboots, as just being as authentic as possible. And I'm here to just tell real stories. And that's all I can do.
And you said you're already hearing from fans, right? You haven't even started your room and you're already hearing.
Oh yeah, we've had, I mean, just to start with, like, we just started an open call. So we just put out the sides, and we got over 5,000 submissions over a weekend. Our our Twitter, our writers' Twitter account has already been broken into by fans. It's intense. So there's a lot, and that's why I say I'm terrified, because the expectations are very high. But I just have to just feel confident in that we're just gonna tell good stories, authentic
And
good stories.
quick follow-up, just, is this writer's room gonna be in person or on Zoom?
So we're gonna be in person. We start on Monday, which
That's really
it
exciting.
was really important to me that if safe, that we could all be together, because it is really I mean, the show is about exploring identity. That I can tell you. It's about exploring identity. And so just being together, I just think will just make such a difference. So I'm very excited about that.
And Julie, along similar lines, I think you spoke about this a little bit already, but what was it like to adapt this musical for the screen? It didn't have quite the following, but it has a sort of meta following, or an interior beloved following in the community. So what was that like for you?
Well, I really feel deeply what Lara just said, because the internet is very vocal. And I think we have watched it grow in how vocal it is, especially over the last 2 years. Our approach to developing Tick Tick Boom, which I think really helped us, is that we approached it as though we were developing a Broadway musical. And so as soon as we had our first draft of our script in 2018, we were like, let's get into a room and let's workshop it. And so we got into a room. It was a 5-day workshop. We got a murderer's row of incredible Broadway actors. We were still trying to keep it secret. And so we were up in Washington Heights at United Palace. And we pulled Andrew Garfield into it the day after his last performance of Angels in America. And before we had even gone in and done notes and started to move things around, it was so helpful to spend 5 days hearing the music, seeing how it pieced together, and then reading it through so that we actually had some information. And the thing that I think really revolutionized the development process for us was first and foremost the fact that Lin-Manuel Miranda feels such a kinship to Jonathan Larson, because they have lived these parallel lives. They know what it feels like to bash their head against a keyboard trying to write, but then also because we had Julie Larson and the family, and her trust in us, starting with her saying, absolutely, you have my blessing to move this forward, to being in the room during that workshop and coming to us and saying, I don't want my brother to be a saint. I want you to just capture his spirit, and I want you to just do right by him, but feel free to make the best movie. Really opened everything up, where it was, okay, we're going to cut these songs. The fans might come after us, but we have a really good reason for doing that, because we have such a strong North Star that we're trying to go to. And we ended up doing 3 workshops in total. And every single one, we've got to pressure test it a little bit more. And so by the time that we even went out to the industry to say, hey, we need a certain amount of money and we're ready to go, it had gone through that entire process and really found itself.
Very cool. And then now we're going to go to the complete other side of this with Sadé. What about creating something absolutely new, let alone with a change maker like Issa Rae right now, in this environment where, it's people, there's not a lot. Well, there is a lot of new. There's both that's coming out. We don't want to say there's not, but there's a lot of people looking for something that's already been proven. So what is it like to create something brand new in this environment?
Well, actually, I think I do relate to Julie and Lara's experiences too, because coming off of such a successful show like Insecure, there's a lot of expectation and pressure for the next thing, and so I think that's always top of mind as well. We want to make sure we're still making something that fans of Insecure loved, but also like welcoming a new perspective and creating a new audience for like a new generation as well. So that was definitely something that was on my mind a lot. But just again, having the ability to create during this time and to explore and workshop and figure things out with Issa and the team at HBO. It's just such a blessing, you know, like just always just such a blessing to be able to create in this time, and collaboration is key, and having healthy collaboration and permission to explore. You can't ask for anything better than that. So that's how we worked.
And this being an Athena event, we have to talk more about creating content that lifts and empowers. And we've already talked a little bit about representation, but how does representation fit into your decision to work on a project? And more than that, how do you handle it when you run into something, either a portrayal in a script that you're working with, or a trope in a piece you're working with that doesn't jive with how you see, you know, it's problematic to your worldview? Like, how do you handle that?
Mm-hmm.
Whoever wants.
I'll just start because I'm unmuted. Sorry. For me, representation plays into every project that I take on. Going to Barnard, I studied anthropology, so I studied cultures and have a deep passion for like social cultural aspects. And it's really important to me as a filmmaker that I'm representing communities authentically and accurately, and being responsible in my filmmaking. And so I always lean towards projects about identity and representing a more like diverse and true depiction of the world. As someone who also is dedicated to showcasing and representing like Caribbean identity, which is something that we don't often see in Hollywood, and when we do, it's portrayed very stereotypically and tropey. I'm very, very particular with the characters I create, making sure that it's authentic. And I think we'll talk about it later, but in like an upcoming project I'm working on, I'm also dealing with like Jewish identity. And so like I am very careful with how I approach representation in my pieces, making sure to consult different people of different backgrounds, and making sure in our casting choices that we're being authentic, that we have language, you know, we'll have like dialect coaches, or, you know, it's all just so important to me, because what we're doing is, you know, trying to show life, and life imitating art imitating life, and doing that responsibly and accurately is so important to me. So representation
Is everything.
is everything.
Working on a show about rap, which is a heavy double standard world. Is that something you guys are taking on in the show? Do you feel yourself balancing the reality with the aspirational? You know what I mean? Like when you talk about representation, sometimes showing what's real is so devastating, and you create these aspirational what it could be. Like, how do you feel you're balancing that?
I mean, I think in the show, Issa and Sarita do a really good job of representing different aspects of what women go through in the industry. And so it's just, again, it's diverse. It's just making sure it's diverse representations, because you know, no one person has the same experience, but creating nuances and making sure we're creating characters who are nuanced and are showing different, you know, levels of representation is important. And I think it's done pretty well in the show, especially casting, you know, real life women in music, who go through these experiences as well, and can lend to that in the characters. So that was something that was top of mind for sure.
Lara, Julie?
I mean, Sadé said so eloquently, diversity and being authentic is, you know, paramount, especially for a show like Degrassi. You know, someone from the original Degrassi described the show, and it's become kind of our tagline, which is, you know, the show has always been a show where anyone watching it, a kid watching it, a parent watching it, looks at it and says, that's me. like you are seen, you are not alone. And so I take it very seriously. My experience is very limited. I'm, a Maltese Canadian white woman. My experience is not what most of the show is. And that's why I call myself a curator, in that our the casting of the room is so important, because those voices, it's all of our stories, and we have to be as specific as possible and as authentic. I use the word authentic. I feel like I've used it 1,000 times, but it really is so important, because if you bullshit, you will be called out. Like, that is just, it is the way it is. So it's really, really important to us. And we're, in terms of casting, just as Sadé said, like, we saw an actress in this open call, and we are writing to her and her heritage now. We're changing everything we thought, and that's what's gonna be. So yeah, I think it's just so important, and it's really exciting as well to be so real, and because you don't have to make up anything. You can really live in the reality of what's going on, and I think that is just going to bring out more exciting stories to tell.
And Julie, maybe you can answer, but also speak to, as a producer, where do your responsibilities come when it comes to protecting your artists and the art and telling a story, and since you're not necessarily the one writing the story, how do you deal with that?
Well, I've sort of spent my career working for a lot of other producers and sort of kind of tailoring myself to their tastes and whatever the projects are on their film and television slates, and finding something to relate to in those stories. And I think it was Kumail Nanjiani who said it, where he said, I've spent my entire life relating to movies about people that don't look like me, and now maybe somebody can relate to a story about me and somebody that looks like me. And now that I'm creating my own space as a producer and having my own company, I'm really able to ask myself the question, but it really all boils down to, what is that thing that I would be obsessed with as a 14-year-old that I didn't have, when all I really had was, Disney's 98 release of Mulan as like my guiding light, and the one movie that I watched over and over again. And I realize now there's power as a producer in being able to say, I think this story is important. And I'm going to put all of my time and my energy behind it to try to move it forward and convince other people as well. And I think we all really talk about diversity, but I feel like the next level is, how can we talk about diversity in different kinds of projects? You still hear that immigrant stories or stories about a certain community maybe feel too small or niche. And I would love to just eradicate that from everyone's vocabulary and create a world where you can have a movie like Shang-Chi, and it's not the only one with just a superpower, a superhero universe and these really strong Asian characters. How can you have a huge heist movie with leads that are not your typical ones? And so I think in the seat that I'm sitting in, I was asking, how can I use my time and my energy, my perspective, to identify and also say, this is really special, and I'm going to build it to the point that other people will also think it's undeniable.
Excellent. So turning back to the audience expectations, in these robust days of social media discussion about their favorite movies and favorite shows, how we've talked about how you are balancing the story, but I'm wondering, how much fear do you function with? I mean, how much are you worried about cancel culture, about the fact that one of your lines in your story or one of your scenes or one of your actors is going to do something and everything kind of blows up? Like, how much is that in your thought process? Anybody? Maybe not at all. Nobody spoke up.
I mean, I'll say I don't worry about it, in that because I'm working with a group of writers and that we check each other and that we are being as authentic as possible, I do think, I mean, controversy, and then there's cancel culture. I'm okay with being controversial, as long as it is authentic and we can stand by it, and that there is a reason for it in the story, that it's coming from character, that it's coming from, it is and again, Degrassi, this is a show that was, had, I believe in America, they didn't even show the abortion scene because it was, so taboo. And we had, Degrassi had, I believe, the first trans character on screen, like 15 years ago, like that whole, so we're going to go there. I'm expecting it. I don't know how you do this show without it. But again, I'm not interested in doing a show that is controversial for controversial sake, or, trying to be anything that isn't coming from character and coming from story. So if people want, if something comes out of that, I hope that we will be able to stand by it, because it is coming from all of those. We're telling a story. That's all.
Right. And that really, I feel like you got to the crux of it. It's that line of, you want controversy. It means you're making people have discussions. But in this climate, so often the controversy slides the other way. But I love the way you broke it down, because we want the controversy. Right now, people just get a little overwhelmed.
Well, we want to challenge people. We want to show people, not, as we were talking about, stories that have not been put on television before. And so that is going to cause controversy. But that is why I'm telling stories, so that we can see things or look at things in a way that we haven't looked at before. I just think that's so important.
Sadé or Julie? I see you going, Julie.
I was going to say, I just always think back to intention, which is, what is the intention in the scene? And if you're just being controversial for the sake of it, then it probably doesn't fit with whatever you're trying to say in that moment. And that's why it feels like it's a little bit of an outlier. And so in all the things that I'm developing, it's always a conversation of, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to represent with this character? And if you're going there, can you really back it up and explain why it matters that that's something that you're putting out in the world? And if you can answer all of those questions, then I don't see how you could be canceled for that. And I feel like cancel culture comes out sometimes in a way when it's about power and about certain people wielding their power in a way to tell other people that they're not worthy. And that I have a problem with. But when it comes to storytelling, I think you should go there. That's the entire point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think it's more so for me, like what I was saying, just making sure I'm doing responsible, like creating responsible and accurate depictions of people, since my work explores a lot of representation and identity. And I at my company, Out of Many Media, I have a cultural advisor, and I make sure to run scripts by her and make sure there's no red flags or anything like that, because it's really, really important to me that people feel seen and feel like they're being accurately portrayed. And also, Black Twitter is a thing. Also, Jamaican Twitter is a thing, and they will come for you. But they're like, nope, that accent's not right, or no, that was like, So it's like there is that fear of like, I want to make my people proud, and like I don't want them to come for me. So maybe to like that regard, like I just feel like that responsibility, like if I'm going to be telling these stories and I have this platform, I have this responsibility to make sure it's accurate portrayals of people.
It's been an awesome conversation. So I'm gonna let you lady go, but first, those of you who can tell us what's next for you, tell us. I don't know who can, but we know what two of you are doing for sure. But if anything new that you can tell us about, share with us. And we've done our best to keep this aspiration. With that in mind, do you have any parting thoughts on this topic of making content right now, creating right now? Julie, you want to start? Not to put you on the spot.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's like my only thought is that everyone should just keep doing it. And I really didn't love, but I did love seeing sort of at the beginning of the pandemic when everything was kind of going off, that the film industry came together and they were just like, we're going to figure it out, because the idea that we're just not going to keep making things and we're not going to keep talking about them is unfathomable. And I think that general attitude is the one to just keep carrying on as things open up. Hopefully, I'm going to knock on wood. Because whether the sands keep shifting under us or not, I think that's a tale as old as time, but we keep doing it. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
I mean, everything you just said. What I would add is, as writers, as creators, write. That was the exciting thing that you can do. You don't need anything or anyone to do that. Just tell your stories, which is keep telling them. It's such a special job that we have, whether you're being paid for it or not. You know, just write and tell the stories, because they are important.
Coming up next for me, I mentioned a little earlier, so I'm in development on my first two feature films set in New York, and also producing a third feature film, which is the feature of Pony Boy, which is a short film I directed that premiered at Tribeca in 2019. We are now producing the feature. So feature films on the horizon for me, also developing a couple TV shows. And yeah, that's about it for me. And in terms of what I want to say, just echoing what Laura just said, honestly, like, keep creating. You don't need anyone else's permission but your own. Especially our women and women of color, like, your stories are needed, and there's a thirst and a hunger for them. So just know that, yeah, you don't need anyone's permission to create or to tell you need to, that whether or not you're allowed to be there. You deserve to be here. You deserve to have your voice heard, and you don't need anyone else's permission or validation. Go for it.
Go for it. I love it. And I love that we have 3 people here who are making it happen. You're proof that we just got to keep at it, right? Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. It was great to talk shop. I can't wait to see what you guys are working on next. So much coming.